Great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so grateful. We're so grateful for this great partnership with the Gailbourn Library because they know way more about doing these programs than we do. So we're really grateful for them, and it's been a great partnership. But my name is Kimberly Haig. I'm the president of Wildlands of Greater Kane County. I'm so glad to welcome you here tonight. We're going to be having a great presentation by Jack Shoba, who we've had present for us before, and we always just love to have him. Before we start, Mary Alice is our plant sale chair is going to give a little talk about our plant sale, but also our pre-sale will be going on in a couple of weeks. Turn it over to Mary.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our program. Thank you so much, Sadia, for coordinating our efforts here through the library. And yes, this is our 14th annual native plant sale that's coming up. It's in May, that is the public sale, but we have way before that, we have the member pre-sale. If you're not yet a member, it would be beneficial for you to become a member to save money on ordering plants, because we do provide a discount for our members. Very soon, in the next couple of weeks, we hope to send out a list of the jot forms, which we used last year, a great way to submit your orders on jot form. And we'll have all the species listed. We have, for Midwest ground covers, we have 38 plug flats, full flats. We also have pint flats, either a half a flat of 5, full flat of 10. We will have ferns in the pint size from Possibility Place, and we will have shrubs and trees from Majestic Oaks. And so once you see those, that we've started the sale, you have about 2 weeks to complete your order. So please take care of that. And as far as paying for the order, that will be coming a little later once we make sure all the plants are available. So we don't have to refund any money. And so we'll have the payments are done by invoice, and you'll be paying online, or if you prefer to send a check, we'll tell you how to send a check to me. I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Thank you.
No, I don't. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to say briefly our upcoming programs, February 26th, which is a Thursday at 7 o'clock, we'll have Angela Morehouse exploring floral networks for bees, beetles, flies, wasps, ants, and bugs. Excuse me, that'll be a virtual program in coordination with Gailbourn Library. March 19th, we'll have Sadie Danko from the Kane County Forest Preserve. And that will be a hybrid program in partnership with the Gailbourn Library, and that will be taking place here. And then April 23rd is Al Watts, which is how women and volunteers were involved in developing the Kane County Forest Preserve. So that will also be a hybrid program with the Gailbourn Library. And in April, we'll have Sadie Danko actually give us a trip to Muirhead Springs, which we hope to, because that's becoming a great birding place once they did a wetland mitigation. So at the moment, I'm not sure if this still. Okay, it seems like my lips, it might be a little bit out of sync. So, but I'm going to introduce Jack Shoba. As I said, we are so glad to have him. We've had him here a number of times, and he's just always a font of information. Tonight he's talking about cemetery prairies, a matter of life and death. And then we'll be visiting virtually several pioneer prairies, learn their values, their problems, their ways, and the way volunteers can help out to their preservation. Jack was a biology and chemistry teacher at Lyons Township High School. It was a school really close to where I was teaching, which was kind of cool. His second career, he helped start the Campton Township Open Space, which is still going strong. He also taught a lot of classes at Morton Arboretum on wildflowers and trees and other subjects. He's been an active volunteer in several, conservation organizations, including the Save the Prairie Society. He won the Dick Young Lifetime Achievement Award for conservation. He's on the board of directors of the Friends of Illinois Nature Preserves. And if you use iNaturalist, which if you come to see the Spring Ephemeral Project, which we always do in Kane County, which we'll be doing again this year, Jack's name is Hazelnut Man on that. So it's prairies are really, Illinois used to be about 70%, I think 70%, 60% prairies. And that we used to have 22 million acres of prairies, and now we're down to 2,000 acres of prairies that were here before everything got either made into cornfields or into shopping malls. So we're less than 1% prairies. So it's really exciting that Jack's going to be talking about these wonderful remnant prairies that we have left. So I'll turn it over, Jack. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim. I call this the cemetery prairies, a matter of life and death. And I take that from William Lee Heatmoon's Prairie Earth book, wonderful book. But if you stay in a white man's old burial ground long enough, this darkness must come to you. His way of life is the land's death, and his way of death is the land's life. So I should point out, if you want to talk about or help out with cemetery prairies, or just talk about them, my email is jackshova@gmail.com. I wanted to point that out. Okay, I'm dedicating this to the memory of Bob Betts, who was my mentor. And Bob grew up in the Bridgeport area of Chicago, near where the Dailies lived, and vacant lots were called prairies. So he studied all the plants and animals and gave them names. He couldn't find anybody that knew real names, so he just made up names. And he really thought he knew what a prairie was. And then one day he went out to the Santa Fe Prairie in Hodgkins, which was at the time a very large railroad prairie. It's still there, but it's small now. And Bob Betts was leading a class, and Floyd Swink was leading a class, and Bob got in this class, and he was just amazed. Floyd went around giving all the Latin names, and Bob finally said, "You have to stop, my head's going to explode." That was July 6, 1959, and I note that date because that's the start of cemetery prairie preservations and prairie preservation in general in Illinois. So there's a statue of the two of them with Floyd on the right, and a statue at the Santa Fe Prairie. And there's a Robert Betts Prairie in the ring at Fermilab, named after him. So he was a mentor of mine. We'll hear more about him. What we're going to do tonight is talk about what are some characteristics of cemetery prairies, why are they important, and what can we learn from them? Why are they so vulnerable? Are they getting enough tender, loving care? Hint, no, they're not getting enough tender, loving care. And so then the final thing is, how can we help? So let's see. And the other thing we want to do is, by the end of this, we want to make sure you know how to spell prairie and cemetery. I was a teacher, so we'll probably have a quiz on that, on how to spell prairie and how to spell cemetery. So why should we care about these small prairies? Well, the short answer is because there are so few large prairies. Betts talked about the moral obligation we have to not destroy everything. We've destroyed pretty much the entire tall grass prairie ecosystem. But do we have the right to just kill off everything, or do other things have a right to live? That may not carry much weight with some people. It's rare. That makes things valuable. That may not carry much weight. They're beautiful. They're interesting. Yeah, but what good are they? As some people would say, well, they are living museums of our history and culture. They're used in all sorts of research. Today, we're interested in climate change, but ecology and other subjects. They're good for education. There are many rare species in these small places, although for rare species, the large prairie would be better. They can be a stepping stone, if we have enough of them, uh, to the next preserve. If you want to restore prairies, they furnish sort of a map of what the prairie used to look like and what we might be shooting for. And they can be seed sources. They are full of genetic diversity and they have undisturbed soil. There's actually a prairie earthworm, and it's not the regular earthworm that we're familiar with. There is a prairie earthworm. I've never seen one. They're very rare. As Kim mentioned, we had 22 million acres, 61% of the state, and the kind of a yellow-orange color was prairie, and the green was forest. So now we're down to something like 2,200 acres of undisturbed prairie, and that would be 1/100th of 1% of the original prairie. That would be like a penny out of $100 bill. So the ones that did survive it wasn't because somebody said we need to set aside this land. They survived because they were too sandy or rocky or steep or too wet to plow. Or in the case of ones in the Chicago region, they were a failed subdivision thanks to the Great Depression. So a big area of prairie is called the Grand Prairie. Now, the flat black soil prairies are the rarest because those are the ones you could plow and plant our corn and beans. We have only 1 square mile of that in the whole state. But some of the best of those are along in pioneer cemeteries and along railroad tracks. They come in two forms. One, the prairie is in an unused part of the cemetery, as you see on the left. And the other option would be the burials were in the prairie itself. There's no issue with saving the ones on the left, but sometimes there's an issue. Some people say, well, we need to mow that and keep it nice and neat. But generally, we have a good response from people. I do want to point out the edge effect, and that's where the weeds get into the prairie from the edges. And so we'll be talking more about that later, but the edge of the prairie is kind of a problem area. Now, who owns these cemetery prairies? Well, there are a lot of different owners. Several of them are owned by a cemetery board. Some of those boards have people have died and the boards are defunct, and we don't really, nobody has a good title to these places. And in some cases, it's hard to know if you could come in and work on it or not. Land trusts, not-for-profit land trusts like Grand Prairie Friends, Natural Land Institute, and the Parklands Foundation, they own some of these prairies and take care of them. Public agencies, there's at least one school district. There's at least one forest preserve district. There are several townships, and there are 2 churches that I know of that own these cemeteries. There are several levels of protection. The state has the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, and the lowest level of protection would be the Natural Heritage Landmark. There's about 5 of those in the state, and that's more of just a recognition this is a really nice prairie. It's not really saved, but that helps the owner to maybe not destroy it if he says, oh, there's something special here. The next level is the Land and Water Reserve, and there are a couple of those. And those have a high degree of protection, although they may allow more things in there. I mean, they might allow hunting, or I know in case there's too many deer in a property, and they allow hunting. It's not a prairie cemetery. The highest level of protection is a nature preserve, and Illinois invented that concept. A lot of states have those now, and we have at least 19 of those in cemeteries. And that declares the land to be the highest and best use of the land. Whereas you might typically see, industry might be the highest and best use or something. So the total number of cemetery prairies is at least 29. It could be as high as 50. I'm trying to visit as many as I can and see if they still exist. So I'm thinking there's probably maybe around 40, but I'm still working on that. That's out of 6,721 cemeteries in the state. We're talking about maybe, 30 or 40 of them. So my friend Denise Morgan is involved in some of these things with me, and she made this map, and oops, back up. So you see they're scattered all over northern Illinois, and a county might have none or one or two typically. Whiteside has more than others. I have put blue arrows at ones we're going to talk more about. I can't talk about all of them. We don't have time, and they all have a story. But Beach Cemetery in Ogle County is a really nice one we'll talk about. Temperance Hill in Lee County. There are 3 of them down I can get there again. We'll get there. I better not touch the so there are 3 of them, that Mount Palatine and Voigt and Short are kind of all in that one area. So I put number 3 there. And then down at the bottom, there are 3 more, Weston and McLean County, Prospect, and Loda. There's actually a 4th one in that area that I haven't visited yet. And then there's a couple close to us, St. Stephen and St. John. And then there's one real close to us. Bluff City Cemetery has a prairie in it, and it's right next to Bluff Spring Fen. So Southern Illinois doesn't have very many of them, partly because the northern part of this map is all plowed and the southern part is wooded. But there are a few in Southern Illinois, but they tend to call them barrens or glades rather than prairie, but they're very similar. Okay, let's visit some of these places. So after Betts learned what a prairie was, 2 years later, he's out there looking for prairies, and he knew you could find them along railroad tracks. So he is walking down the road by that railroad track that we see in the top center, and he notices a compass plant. And then he looks around and he said, whoa, this is beautiful. It's a cemetery and it's got a prairie on it. And the story I've heard is that hunters used to go there, and there was a lady that lived nearby and didn't like the hunters, and she would just burn the prairie so it would keep the hunters away from it. So I haven't confirmed that story, but makes sense. The more times it's burned, the better it is. And this is like the only one that was burned consistently for all these years. So it's a beautiful prairie. Burials ended in 1911. It's 1 acre in size, and it's possibly the only acre in Will County that is in its original condition. So Natural Land Institute saved it, figured out who owned it and got the ownership and gave it to the Forest Preserve of Will County. So this was Betts's first prairie. So at this point, we know there's one cemetery prairie in the state. And I was just learning what a prairie was in 1970. And my wife and I decided we need to visit a prairie every week. So we'd see what a prairie really was, because one visit doesn't do it for you. It changes through the season. So there I am with my oldest son. Looks like I'm keying out a plant, trying to figure it out. And my wife and I found that on our own without anybody telling us where it was. We knew it had to be near a railroad track, and we knew what township it was in. So there's a picture in the middle, bottom, that shows a stone right there in the middle of the prairie and with prairie dock. And then later in that same year, Ray Schillerberg from the Arboretum called Bob Betts, and Bob Betts called me and some others and said, we're going to put a fence around that. So I went out there. I think I probably gave him $20 or so, I don't know, something a little bit towards it. And it turned out later that Ray Schillerberger had put like $1,300 of his own money into it. And I fenced it. Now, why did we fence it? Because people were knocking over the stones of all these old cemeteries. And then the theory was we don't want anybody trampling anything. We don't want anybody to dig anything up. So we just want to keep people out of there was the theory. So we fenced it and they put a padlock on it. And I never went back until 2016. I got special permission. So I thought, well, they're trying to keep people out. I guess that's me too. And then I recently found out that Schulenberg went back to it twice over his lifetime because he had the same reasoning. We're keeping other people out. We better keep me out also. So now the Forest Preserve has it, and they tore down our old fence and put a new fence. And then there's some buffer land inside the fence too. So this is the only one of the prairies I'm going to talk about that you can't go into without special permission, and they really don't give permission much. You can't get a group going in there. So you can see the wonderful condition it's in. And I wanted to point out at the bottom there, the lily has a C value of 10. And that's a whole nother story, what that all means. But basically that's conservatism value, and weeds are zeros and ones and twos and threes, and fives and sixes are the basic prairie plants. But when you get to 8, 9, and 10, those are the plants that live only in the highest quality prairies, the least disturbed prairies. So if you just see an 8, 9, or a 10, you know you're in a great spot, and you look around, see what else you can find. I took a picture of this compass plant outside of the fence because you can walk down there, and that's a reminder that that's what Betts saw that attracted his interest. So looking through the fence, I see some non-native daylilies, and when I walk around in the prairie, I see what might be a lilac bush, and mostly we would take those out these days, but those are planted there by the relatives of the deceased. So as long as they don't spread and take over the place, we're leaving them there. Two of my former students at the Arboretum are the stewards there now. Well, as it turns out, you can fall off the edge of a prairie just like you can fall off the edge of the earth if it's flat like they say it is, or used to. So there's an 18-inch drop off from the prairie to the farm field. So what would cause that? Well, that's how much soil we've lost. The prairie was never plowed, and we've lost that. Now, how did we lose that? Well, largely in our area to water erosion, but some wind erosion. and some compaction of the soil. But Illinois had lost half of our topsoil by 1980. Now the farmers are doing a lot better now, so we haven't lost the other half. But we're still, a lot of Illinois is going down the Mississippi River. So that impressed me, drop off. So every prairie I go go to the edges of it to see if there's a drop off. So Brookville, Afton, Beach, Temperance, Mount Palatine all have a drop off, and others do too. So then I thought, well, how much of a drop off is that? And I thought, well, that probably averages a foot, which is 300 millimeters. And I don't know how long it's been plowed, but let's say 150 years, got to be somewhere like that. So 300 divided by 150 means we've lost 2 millimeters a year. That's 1/10 of an inch. Every year we've lost the 2 millimeters. Now, prairie produces that topsoil, but it produces an inch every few hundred years, 300 to 1,000 years. I put 500 in there. So prairie is trying to form the soil back again, but not as fast as we're eroding it away. Now, scientists have done carefully and with instrumentation and all kinds of graphs and math and all kinds of things. And what they found was that we were losing nearly 2 millimeters per year. That's what I said. With my, it was really 1.9, and I said it was 2. So they looked at all different prairies, some of ours in Illinois, and they went to Iowa and other states. So sorry, we can't see the top of that. This is an article by Betts published in 1989.
I think they can see it at
Hmm?
home. I think they can see it at home.
Oh, they can see it at home. Okay. I can't see it. The species composition of old settler silt loam prairies. That's Betts and his friend Herb Lamp published this at a prairie, they delivered it at a prairie conference in 89, but didn't publish it for a while. And the essence of the article is that he started in 1961, as you know, around cemetery. That was the first. And then he visited, he wondered, are there more? So he visited 824 cemeteries, a few of them in Indiana, over a course of about 10 or 12 years. I don't know how many times he went back to them. Some of them he went back to just a couple times, and some he went back to many times. And it was especially in the 1970s, and he found 150 of them had some prairie species, not necessarily very many. And even if it was mowed, he would recognize these little tiny prairie plants and call them bonsai prairie plants. So he found 44 that had enough that he would study them further, and enough turned out to be 30. If it had 30 or more plants, he thought it was a good one and he would go back to it. 29 of them were the black soil silt loam prairies, and he found 180 species together in all of the 29 prairies. And he didn't write down for this article the 100 non-native and woody plants that were there, because he was only interested in finding prairie plants. So here's a table of the 29 cemeteries that he went to, and I marked NP if it's a nature preserve. So you see that many of Betts's prairies became nature preserves. And you see the number of species ranges from a low of 30 at Prairie 29 in Indiana, and a high up around in the 80s, several of them. Number 13, I visited recently. It's gone. It's all mowed now, so that one's gone. And I visited number 24. They pronounce it Nevada. Apparently locals call it Nevada, and there's one grave that has a few prairie plants around it, but that's all that's left. So, but most of these are really good, and I'm trying to visit as many of them as I can. The size of them, he's got it in hectares, which is 2.5 acres. So prairie number one is 4/10 of a hectare. That'd be an acre. So the small ones were an acre or two, and a really big one would be like prairie number two. I visited that recently, and that's 5 acres. So that's good size for a cemetery prairie. So here's on the left is the 180 plants that he found. Well, just a few of them, but it goes on and on. There'd be 180 plants over there, and across the top would be the 29 cemeteries. So you could pick a cemetery that you want to study, like number 28, and I draw a line down there with a highlighter so I don't get off on the wrong track. And you can see what plants were in that particular cemetery. And we'll go to that cemetery in a little bit. So you can see some plants, like plant number 1, was found in only one cemetery, although I found it in another one, but I haven't found it in number 29. Now, notice Andropogon girardii, that's big blue stem. How many does that? That's every single prairie, right? And how about little blue stem? It has a new name now, but the old name was Andropogon scoprarius, and that's in every single one. And the lead plant, Amorpha canescens, is in almost every one. So those would be plants you could expect would have been in the prairie in the early days. Some of the others are kind of rare, but I wanted to point out Apios americana with an arrow next to it. It's found in 2, so that's not very common. We'll come back to that. Anyway, what I'd like to do is go to all these and see what plants are still there. He published another article with sand prairies and savannas, and the only 2 I've visited, you're going to see, and that is number 3, Brookville, which is a nature preserve, and down there at Cemetery 11 in Grundy County, the Short Cemetery. Well, those are nature preserves. The next important thing that happens is the Illinois decides we need to see what we've got out there. So in 76, they went around the whole state to find out how many prairies, how many wetlands, how many forests, what do we have? And they looked at 3,900 cemeteries and found 24 high quality ones, total of 60 acres. And that's the list on the right. And we're going to see several of those. And then he said they said 111 of them had potential for restoration. And then in 2011, they had an update and added a few more. So now the figure is at 29 that they tend to talk about. But they only visited it one day. They did have expert botanists and they wrote everything down, but they visited on one day, so they didn't see as much as Bet saw. So here's one of those, one that I have visited many times, Temperance Hill from 1846, and it's 8/10 of an acre. And notice the stone is not in the prairie. They mow around the stone, so this has just land that they never needed. It's all big farms. There's no community right around there anymore. And notice the edge effect that we talked about earlier. The sumacs are moving in from the edges. But there are a couple of tens there, the cream false indigo and the downy gentian. So this is a really nice prairie. So I've studied that one. And I make my list like this. So first I have all the plants that anybody's ever seen. And if they're green, Betts or the INAI saw them. Betts gets the first column of my chart, and the Illinois Natural Areas Inventory gets the second column. So if Betts or the INAI saw it, and I can still find it, it's green. If they saw it and I can't find it, after many years of looking, it's magenta. And if they didn't see it, then I did, it's yellow. But mine are things like down at the bottom, asparagus. I can find it every time I go out there. They didn't see it. So look at the ratio of those. There's a lot of stuff that must have come in or they missed it, but they were good botanists. So it's still a nice prairie. It's got a lot of green there, but it's lost a lot of things. So then the question comes up, should we put them back? And in this particular one, they've said, so far they say, no, we want to see what a prairie would look like with no other genes coming in from elsewhere. I think it's just going to disappear, but we'll see. So I found 43 of the 64 plants that these botanists had found. That's 2/3 of them. I can't find 21 of them. So either I'm missing them, which could be for a few, but about 1/3 of the plants have disappeared. So it's still a nice prairie, but 1/3 of the plants, just think of that, 1/3 of the plants. So how many more years will it be before another third is gone? And the new ones I find are more than 50% of the total list are new things I found. So either I'm a better botanist than all those guys, or things are moving in, one or the other. Let's see if we can find out which of those is true. Well, here's a scientific paper. It says there was no evidence for losses over time from 76 to 88. I'm like, I would not agree with that. And maybe it was fine till 88, but boy, since 89 till now, a lot of stuff has disappeared. And another paper, the pace of plant community change is accelerating. And they found more things disappeared in 15 years than in the previous 47 years. So things are disappearing there. Swink and Wilhelm say the Illinois prairie has been so completely obliterated that we really don't even know what grew in those places. Well, we kind of do because we have Betts's list. And we also have a study by Ken Robertson at 3 black soil prairies. I had a blue arrow by those. 3 really nice black soil prairies. And I'm just showing you 4 plants. We don't want to go through the whole list. And these are all milkweeds. So the Sullivan's milkweed is found at all 3 prairies. The common milkweed at 3, butterfly weed 2 out of 3, and what I would call the world milkweed, he called it the horsetail milkweed at all 3. So that gives us an idea of what, if that's what's in the best ones today, or a few decades ago, that's probably a pretty good representation of what the prairies would have looked like. So let's go to those 3. We'll start at Weston Cemetery in McLean County. It's 5 acres, so it's a big one. interestingly, it's a railroad prairie and a cemetery prairie. I think it's the only one like that I can think of. And on the left, you can see it's a rich prairie. Betts found 77 species there. That was a high number. And you can see also that the stones are right out in the prairie. That one's co-owned by two groups and managed by Parkland. So it is managed, but it's a nice prairie. One of the best is used to be called Pine Ridge Prairie, but it's now called Loda Cemetery Prairie. It's by the town of Loda. So the cemetery is at the lower part of the upper. I'm looking at the upper left here, and above the word cemetery, there's a rectangle, and that's dark. Maybe it was burned, and that's the original prairie. Then all of that is owned by the cemetery for future expansion. So then we'll drop down to 2005. And I do this by going on Google Earth, and you can back up time on Google Earth, and I back up to where it's a good view of what I'm looking for. So in 2005, the Natural Land Institute buys some land at the edge of the cemetery and cuts a deal. You can use this land for your future burials, but don't bury anybody in the prairie. We get to keep the prairie as is and plant prairie seeds in the part that didn't have any prairie. Now we'll move over to the right side at the top, and you see the brown area. So there's some additional buffer. And not long ago, this is the lower right picture of how much land the prairie and the buffer covers. And at the far left of that picture, I think they've just bought some more buffer over there. So the more you can get, the better. So here are some plants. All of them are C values of 8. So they're all good prairie plants. I put a couple of insect pictures in. I'm now trying to document the insects also. And I'll be sure to be at next month's meeting about the insects. And it's just that we know more about the plants than we knew about the insects that are out there. All right, here's the third of that 3 good prairies called Prospect Cemetery. On the left, you can see they burned most of it. That brown part didn't burn. And the lower part of that cemetery, there are no gravestones in that at all. And then in the middle and upper part, there are scattered stones, and the trees there is savanna. So you can see that the stones are right out in the prairie. Here's butterfly weed that was found in 2 of the 3 prairies, and Sullivan's milkweed that was found in all 3 of the prairies. Now I'm going to take you to a little tiny prairie out in the middle of nowhere, the Hetzler Cemetery Prairie in Bureau County. It's an acre. They had 599,360 acres, and they're down to 1 acre. That just seems hard to believe. I'll let you do the math on that. So looking at this prairie from the aerial view, it's a small prairie. It's an isolated island. There's no seeds that are going to blow in there from a nearby prairie. It's all edge. There's no part of that prairie that's far from an edge. So the whole prairie is at risk of the weeds coming in. It's surrounded by that farmland, so the herbicides are going to kind of drift in there. This needs a good buffer, a big buffer. It's flat. as are most of these. If climate changes and things would like to move to a different spot, it's flat, so moving over a little bit won't help. If there were some hills and wet places and dry places and rocky places and sandy places, maybe they could find a spot to survive. But if they're not going to survive, they have no place to go to survive. So there's Gentian, a little bit of a story there. I happened to go there with my wife, and there were two people out there collecting seed and spreading them around. I thought, oh, I should introduce myself. And it turned out we knew Amy and Dave Brewer from an Audubon group. And Amy said, there's gentians here someplace, but I haven't found them yet. So my wife and I left and we drove away. And about 10 minutes later, we get a text with a picture. I found it. I found it. So this is her picture that came to us as a text. So now here's a sign I found there. And this is exactly the sign that Beth showed me one time years ago. Maybe not at this spot, but, and it has a picture of Mead's milkweed, which was Beth's favorite plant. And I'd like you to notice the text. This cemetery prairie is being preserved and managed as a memorial to the settlers. Okay, point one. This is a memorial to the settlers who are buried here. This is one of the last remnants of the Illinois prairies. Point number two. For information, call the Prairie Preservation Society at Northeastern Illinois, which is where Bet's taught. And I was with him and I said, Bob, I never heard of the Prairie Preservation Society. He said, I'm the president. I said, well, how many members do you have? One. So he would put these signs up everywhere and make people think that, oh yeah, boy, there are a lot of people interested in this. So here are two, remembering points 1 and 2, here are two plaques by Loda and Prospect. This tract of tallgrass prairie is one of the few remaining and preserved as a memorial to the early settlers. Okay, let's look at Prospect. This entrance is a memorial to the persons buried here and to the prairie remnant. So Betts started this, which we have continued ever since, to recognize that this is a memorial to these people who would recognize the prairie plants if they came back, and that's about all they would recognize. So Beach Cemetery, one of my favorites, it's 2.5 acres, and it's got an acre of buffer in Ogle County, and Natural Land Institute owns it, and it's lost 8 of its 58 plants, which isn't too bad, but this has waves of flowers at different times a year. Shooting stars or blazing stars, pale purple coneflower. So it's a wonderful prairie. And I was talking to Alan Branhagen, the head of the Natural Land Institute, and he said, we're trying to get some buffer land. I said, well, I'm good, I'm in for that. He said, how much? I told him a number, how much I'd give him. And I thought, okay, we can buy a little quarter of an acre or half an acre or something. And he says, I'll use yours as I'll go to other people and say, I got some, you want to chip in on that? Next thing I know, he's bought 149 acres. So the green down there is the original prairie. And instead of the acre or two that I thought we were buying, he got 149 acres with some money they already had, which now depleted it. Now they're trying to get back, so if you want to donate to that, I think they got about 75% of it, and they're trying to get back to the amount they had so that when the next deal comes up, they can do something. So I can't wait to get out there. This will be a planted to prairie, and I think they're going to use it as a seed source for other places. Anyway, here's one with a story. Don't they all have a story? This is the Voigt Pioneer, or Voigt Pauper Cemetery. And people didn't have any money to buy gravestones. So there are no standing stones. And I found one flat stone, and I think there may be a couple more. So that's a pauper cemetery. So there's no stones in the way. It's all prairie. And it was supposedly a grade C prairie, but I got in there. I thought this is a way better prairie than what I've read about. And then my wife and I were looking, and one of us saw a gentian. And said, okay, see, this is better. And then, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's 5 more. I think we had 100 gentians we found, the most I've ever seen anywhere in this pauper cemetery. Okay, some prairie, well, they all need help, but some need a lot of help. So here's some that are a mess. St. Stephen's in Carroll Stream. It was an 1853 graveyard. Now, you know the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery, right? A graveyard, the church is there and people are buried in the yard of the church, whereas a cemetery doesn't have to have a church there. So this used to be a graveyard, now it's a cemetery, because the church, well, let's start with the aerial view. You can see that the prairie is on the left and the cemetery is on the right. And so there's no stones out there in the prairie. And the picture on the right shows this is surrounded by drainage ponds and industry and all kinds of businesses and what used to be a railroad track. So what happened is the church was just at the bottom of the picture. And then the train came through and separated the church from its cemetery. And eventually the church ended up joining with another congregation and left their cemetery behind. And to get to that cemetery now, you drive through the ready mix parking lot of the ready mix company. And you think, am I in the right place? And I went really slowly, and my car is full of cement dust. So it's tricky to get to, and it is fenced. This is another one that's fenced because people were having parties back there because it's so isolated, and also they were damaging the gravestones. So we're trying to get that one restored. It did have a lot of senna, which is not common in the prairies, but it's a mess, and they're going to burn it this spring, and we're going to see what comes up. There's another one, Brookville Lutheran. I visited this one many times, and the cemetery is separate from the prairie, and the prairie is in the upper left of the picture. And the problem is it's so overrun with sumac that you can't even get into it to see what's left. I think, best I can tell, it's lost 45% of its plants. I can get in there when they do burn it, which is very often. In the spring, you could get in, but then the sumacs grow up. So it used to be a nice prairie, and I wish we could work on that one. Here's one in McHenry County, Queen Anne Cemetery, just an acre. And my wife and I drove past it. We missed it twice. It's so full of sumac. And then we finally saw, okay, this must be it. And it turns out just this last year, the Land Conservancy of McHenry County is taking over the management of it. What happened was the owner gave it to 2 families many, many years ago and said, your 2 families can be buried here. And there's people have died over the years and different people. And there's one person around from one of the families who said, yeah, go ahead and burn it. My grandpa used to burn it. I want to keep burning it. So we said, okay, we got 1 vote. So we don't know really who owns it exactly. So they cut down everything and burned, and we're going to wait and see what comes up this year. When I was there, I found almost no prairie plants, but I found a prairie dock and a yellow coneflower. I also have Betts's list from 1976. It does not include prairie dock or yellow coneflower. How could you miss prairie dock? So I'm thinking it maybe came in or somebody planted it or something. Or maybe he just missed it or, too much sumac or something. So we have a list of what used to be there, and just to walk in there now, you wouldn't find any of the things, but we're hoping this spring some nice things will come up. St. John Lutheran is in Darien, and a friend of mine, John Banizak, taught a block or so from there, a couple blocks, and he was walking around the neighborhood and he saw these prairie plants growing in the fence row, and he talked the cemetery board into not mowing it anymore, and they didn't mow it like weekly or anything, a couple times a year maybe. And so it happened, and then he called me to look at it in 1985. I have a couple pictures, the ones you're seeing here, and it looks like it's full of shooting stars, and it's not full of sumac and brush. You can tell that. And so we have his list, and we've been working on it since 2020, weekly, with a crew of 5 to 10 people. And we have our new list from the last 5 years, and we are comparing it to the old list, and it's lost 21 of 66 species. It was a mess. And it's added 114, mostly weedy ones. But we're getting rid of the weeds gradually, and it's coming around. It's looking pretty good. The top left is how it used to look when we started. And then at the lower left, here's my friend Denise that I've mentioned, surrounded by sumac. We've gotten rid of all that sumac, and it is a registered Illinois Natural Heritage Landmark, which is recognition of how good it is, and it's not really much protection. But the church is gung ho to save it. They're all in. Their pastor is a naturalist and from Minnesota, and he's all in, and he comes out and helps us at the work days and stuff. So there's hope for that one. So as it happened, I took a picture of a rare thistle in 1985, one of the few pictures I took, and it was a threatened species back then. It's found only around the Great Lakes area. That's what endemic means. It's critically imperiled in Illinois, known from 39 documented places, and we found one. So we got all excited about it. And we put a bag around it and collected the seeds as they got ripe and spread them around. As it turns out, Hill's thistle is like an annual. Once it blooms, it dies. It's also like a perennial. It doesn't, it lives many years before it blooms. It blooms once and dies. So once you see the flower, it's done for. So we're waiting to see if we get anything, except that they require cross-pollination. Where is the nearest Hill's thistle? Not nearby. So I doubt if any of our seeds will grow. We did find brown nut, which I pointed out at the beginning, it's only found in 2 other prairies. So that's kind of fun to find something that's pretty rare. 2 of his 19 prairies. It has a really pretty flower and apparently an edible tuber. And it has some plants that are tens. Another one, this is Short Pioneer Cemetery, Nature Preserve. I'm not sure where they buried the tall pioneers. Maybe they have their own place. No, it's a Short family, and you can still be buried there if you're a member of the Short family. And in 1940, the little prairie is outlined in dots, and that was all like where it says 1940, it was pretty open, probably pasture land or something. But under that 1940, it's all coal, and it was mined, strip mined right up to the cemetery. And they stopped there because they didn't want to destroy the cemetery, but it was mined, so it's highly disturbed. And then the trees were growing up all just shading everything out. But Mike Campbell got friends together and he's been working down there, cutting down all the trees and spreading the seed around, and it's really looking good. Here's a couple plants that we found on a visit, and it's just full of these. And I've never seen so many dragonflies and damselflies at a prairie as we saw there. They were just everywhere, several species. So that was exciting. So that one was in bad shape, but it's looks like it's coming back. Here's another one that's out in the middle of the countryside, Mount Palatine, and you have to walk down or drive down that grassy area, and you can see in the background there's some trees back there. And the day I got there was right after a burn, and but you could see the trees that survived the burn there. And I went back one more time and saw that they were black locusts, and so we need to get those out of there. And then there was one bur oak out there. So this is an interesting case. It didn't seem to be a real rich prairie, although I did find one plant that was a 10, a rough prairie lettuce. And Jerusalem artichoke, you don't see that real often. But here's the interesting thing. They put a bronze plaque with the name of everybody that's buried there. Because you can't find a lot of these graves. These old stones are, eroded away and broken, sunken into the ground. And I thought that was very nice. And I would suggest that to other prairies as a nice gesture. Okay, here's how not to find a prairie cemetery. Find a cemetery with prairie in its name. There are 127 cemeteries in the state with prairie in their name. I don't know of any that actually have any prairie. But the fact that they have prairie in their name tells us something. If a place is called Prairie Center, it was probably the center of a big prairie area. So it tells us that there must have been prairie there back in the day. And then there's one new cemetery down by Peoria that's named Prairie, and it doesn't have a prairie either. So what we've talked about is that prairie cemeteries are few, they're small, they're isolated. They're important and they're interesting, but they're extremely vulnerable to disturbance, herbicides, the edge effect. There were two types that we've seen: graves in the prairie or beside the prairie, and that was more common. The beside the prairie, about 2/3 of them are that kind. And there are different levels of preservation. Some are not preserved at all the way up to the nature preserve level. But most of them need our help. Some of them really need our help. So I'm glad you asked. How can we help? Well, I am on the board of the Friends of Illinois Nature Preserves. You can go to our website and there's a workday calendar of all the different places. It's not just cemetery prairies, it's all different kinds of places. And there's often 2 or 3 work days going on any given Saturday, and you could maybe find one close by or find one of particular interest, like a cemetery prairie, hint, hint. So look at that calendar. And then there's also a link to the Preserve Directory, Illinois Nature Preserve Directory. If you just Google Illinois Nature Preserve Directory, you'll get an old version of it. if you want to get the latest, you have to go through our website and get there. I don't, it's crazy. Anyway, you could go out and have a lot of fun with people collecting seeds or burning or, cutting brush. And our goal is to take care of all 640 places around the state that are nature preserves and land and water reserves. Some don't need any help. A park district take good care of their property, like St. Charles Park District, but a lot of them need help. So if you do that and click on the directory, this is what you'll get. And you'll get a list of all the counties and the nature preserves that are found in those counties. So in Carroll County, you see the Brookville Lutheran one that I just talked about that's full of sumac. And then on the land and water reserves, we see in Kane County, Campton Hills Park, which has a name change. But, that's a land and water reserve at Hickory Knolls. And then on the right, you see the state is divided up into 10 areas, and there's somebody like Angela Morehouse has the yellow area, next month's speaker. So if you're really into this, you want to talk to the state person who is in charge, but there's 10 people and they're in charge of 650 places. So each of them has an average of 65 places, and they don't get around to all of them, I can tell you. So that's why we need the volunteers to come to these places. So I guess, the other thing you could do is go on iNaturalist. And this is Temperance Hill that we saw. And there were 5 people have gone out there. I'm one of them. And so 4 other people have gone out there and taken pictures of these things and put it online at iNaturalist. And 60 people have helped identify them, because you need 2 people to identify it to make it research grade. So 60, and we found 81 species so far, and I think that's just the plants. So you can either be one of the observers and be the 6th person, or you could help identify. The first 3 there have not been identified to species. If you know your sunflowers and so forth, you could identify that from your home, or you could go out and make new observations. So that would be a way people can help. And then I'll put those in a column in my spreadsheets. If you see these things. I think we're about ready for the quiz. So as I mentioned, I'm in the Friends of Illinois Nature Preserve. Our goal is to go set up volunteer, and we have some paid staff, and we try to set up volunteer groups. And then the paid staff will help get you trained in herbicide application and chainsaw use or whatever. And then when you start to emerge as a leader, you could be in charge of the group, and our person can go start another group. So we're maybe up to maybe 30 or 40 places that we work on our way to 600. So we got a ways to go. The Grand Prairie Friends, these are ones I belong to. There's a lot of other organizations that can help. These are mine. Grand Prairie Friends in East Central Illinois, Natural Land Institute out of Rockford, but they work all over the place. Conservation Foundation in the Northeast around us, and the Nature Conservancy is statewide. Oh yeah, there's a quiz. So we want to see, how do we spell prairie? Okay, what are the missing letters? Louder?
AI.
AI, good. How about the folks on Zoom? Did you get that? And how about cemetery? What's missing there? ER. Okay, good. We passed the quiz. So with that, we can see if we had any questions. questions, comments, corrections from misidentified?
Someone did point out that asparagus came from the ancient Mediterranean from Europe. I'm not sure why they added that.
Probably, if that asparagus, it's a non-native,
Yeah,
and I list the non-natives in capital letters. So that's a non-native, and most of our non-natives did come from Eurasia. I mean, I know of like one thing that came from South America.
is that
That's
right?
pretty much from Eurasia. So.
Huh. And that same person asks whether there's anything coming up in Kane County for volunteering and events.
Question, anything in Kane County, if you're interested in ones that aren't listed on our site, contact me. We don't really have any cemetery prairies in Kane. The closest thing would be Ferguson Creek Fen work days and Trout Park work days. And what else? A lot of the Kane Forest Preserves, but we don't have, we have Prairie Cemetery in St. Charles, but there's no prairie there. So I don't think we have any prairies, but there's plenty of work days.
Right. And Kim, are the Kane County Forest Preserve work days?
They're listed on the Kane County Forest Preserve website.
On the Kane County Forest Preserve website,
Yeah.
their work days.
Right.
And Kim, are you still a steward?
I can tell you Johnson's Mound is the first and third Thursday, 9 to 12, except when it's 10.
It just so happens.
Just so
that-
happens,
that,
except when it's 10.
Johnson's Mound.
Yeah.
So there are work days, but cemetery prairies are gonna have to travel farther.
There's a question that you already answered as part of your presentation. They were asking whether any part of Elgin's Bluff City Cemetery is a preserved prairie, and so that's already been answered.
Yeah, there is, I'll answer that a little bit more. Bluff City Cemetery is right next to Bluff Spring Fen, and I go there every now and then, Bluff Spring Fen, and not far from the parking lot. There is a steep hill, too steep to put graves on, and it's got a prairie on it. And now they have a sign that's called like Butterfly Garden or something. They put the sign. And I happened to be there one day when they lit it on fire. And it's a dry prairie and going up the hill. And I had my camera and I got like one picture. The fire lasted like 30 seconds. The whole prairie was burned up just in seconds. And I got, like one shot. By the time I'm adjusting my camera, that it was all over. I don't think it's a real rich prairie, but it's a prairie. And then of course, Bluff Spring Fen is incredibly rich, but that's more of a wetland. Although there's a dry prairie there too. They have every kind of prairie there.
This questioner asks whether the Will County, Vermont prairie was maybe the prairie that May T. Watts mentioned in her book.
Yes, May Watts, that's how I found it.
Oh, is it?
I knew what township it was in because May Watts mentioned it, and I guess in reading the landscape. So she had a essay in there about the plowing match, and overhearing somebody say, looking at people plowing the fields, "This is America." And then her essay was, "No, that's not America. America's over here in the fence row." Of course, nowadays there's no fence rows even. But she goes on, there's a big blue stem and so forth. And somewhere in there, she mentions the Vermont Cemetery. So we knew what township it was in. So yeah. So I'll tell you more about our 1970 every week. So there weren't very many prairies known at that time. And so we would repeat every few weeks. We'd go to every prairie we knew, and that took us a month. And back to early ones again. So I always wanted to do that again, and I never have.
Yeah. This is Sue Steyer, who says she wants people to know that Fermi Lab also has public restoration work days.
That's right, that's true. The part in the ring is called the Betts Prairie, but there's lots of other prairie, almost all of it planted. I think they might have a little bit of natural prairie, but most of it's planted, but it's planted quite a long time ago, so it's had time to mature. It tends to be too much grass in most of them. Betts had a theory of how to plant the prairies, and this was the first time anybody planted prairies in that scale. And his theory was you would start with kind of the more weedy, I mean, prairie plants, but more on the weedy side, like yellow coneflower or something that's easy to grow. And then later, the prairie would kind of prepare itself, and then you put the gentians in later. I think the theory nowadays is get your seed in early. Get all the kinds of things you want to have, get it in there. But Betts thought it was like a succession that you'd work your way through, and after enough years. The story goes that and I remember him telling me he thought this would be a great place for a big prairie, and he was talking about in the ring and how they got it all over the place. And he went to Director Wilson and suggested the idea, and he had a couple of friends with him, I think Schulenberg and somebody else, and they suggested this would be a good place for prairie, and they explained it and explained it. And Wilson said, well, how long is this going to take? And I remember him saying to me, oh, I'm sitting there trying to think, should I say 1,000 years? I don't know, I should probably say 2 years. So, so I forget what he settled on, 20 years or something like that. And Wilson said, well, you better get started. So that they were all in on it, and they have done a good staff who didn't know anything about it at the beginning, and Betts would tell them all this stuff, and finally one of them said, if you told me that, it's the Betts, if you told me the moon was made out of green cheese, I would believe you. And that's one of the best compliments I ever got. So, okay, we got anything else?
What about the prairie recreated by the science teacher at SCHS? That must be St. Charles.
St. Charles.
School. It says it's forest preserve.
Well, Bob Horlock from St. Charles High School had his students planting back in the 70s at what's now called Horlock Hill at what's the name of that forest preserve? At Leroy Oaks, which is not named for an oak tree, but for a person. Leroy Oaks. And it's right next to an actual prairie, which is on a west facing slope. So it gets a west wind. So it's it's more like an out west prairie. So it's an actual prairie. And then he planted just to the east of that. So the real prairie is a dry prairie, but his is more of a medium or mesic prairie on the level. And parts of it you would swear were original prairie. It's so good, and it was planted so long ago. It's a little bit spotty because kids would have different places they were supposed to plant their things. Some things grew better than others. But that's very nice. And you can walk in that one because it's a planted prairie, and it's a good place for photography then.
Now, Sue Steyer again just mentions that there are 2 small remnants at Fermi Lab.
I guess there are. I haven't seen them.
Okay.
I think they had, I didn't know it was 2, but they have a little bit of original prairie, and the rest of it is planted.
And then Christina Hartman, are there any modern cemeteries in Illinois that are trying to implement conservation of prairies?
As it happens, I used to end I've given this a few times before, and I ended it with a picture. I can't get it. I don't know where it is. So where I'm going to be buried, out by the Mississippi River, there is a cemetery called Casper Creek Natural Cemetery. And it is next to an actual prairie nature preserve. But of course, you couldn't be buried in a nature preserve. So it's next to it in a planted prairie. And then there's no metal or no embalming or anything. It's just the old fashioned way. Can be put in a bag or a pine box with no nails. And they put you not real deep, so that you'll just decay naturally and come back as a big blue stem or something.
Yeah.
And then they put prairie seeds on the grave where they dug it up. They dug up some already prairie. It's not very old and the prairie isn't real good yet, but it'll get better every year.
We're gonna make it better.
And so a friend of mine's buried there already, and no upright stone, but you can have a local stone, I think sandstone, which will only last 100 years, then it'll be eroded away. But they're right next to some Indian mounds, and you know, a nice place for people to visit. I mean, it's a long ways away.
Would you say the name again for anybody?
Casper Creek.
Casper Creek,
Casper Creek.
and with the spelling of CASPER or AR?
CASPER, is it? I don't know if I could find my slide,
Oh, that's okay, but
Anyway.
that's close.
but you could email me and I'll send you information. The woman, they have one paid employee and it's actually owned by a conservation group. And volunteers take care of the place. There's only one employee, that's the sales person that handles the details. And it's the local people are really in on this, and they love the idea. And they'll come out and I guess they dig the grave, and you know, they'll help you put on whatever kind of a thing you want to do, if you want to have something for your family or whatever. And she's so interesting. My wife invited her to her church. She came and gave a talk at the church and had 15 or 20 people come to it. That's really interesting to know the different, you know, ways that can be treated after you're gone. It's not cheap, but funerals aren't cheap.
Right.
I mean, it's largely a donation to them. It's like $5,000 or something,
That's not out of.
which is expensive for a little piece of land, but on the other hand, funerals are expensive.
Well, here's a comment. No, I live near Vermont Cemetery. It's near and dear to my heart. I've been visiting it since 1998. The Plainfield Library has an inventory of the people who are buried there, and it's fun to see the inventory of the plants as well at the Plainfield Library.
Oh,
Wow.
they have the inventory of the plants?
The plants
This person say?
and the people.
Oh, I'd love
Yeah.
to see the updated, yeah, thank you.
Plainfield Library. And then, again, this is just a
Oh,
comment.
that's actually up there.
Oh, it's up there.
Well,
Okay,
and the other.
so, and there's a
yeah.
thing.
And there wasn't up there too about person, has work days at Poplar Creek.
Yeah.
That was up there before, so I never got to see it.
Oh, good.
So, okay, yeah. So good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for coming. And it was really fascinating. So thank you, Jack, and thank you, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you, or not see you, but you'll see Angela Morehouse on February 26th. So
Okay, let me
thank you
give
very
a
much.
Thank
shout
you,
out to
everybody.
Ed if they're out there.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Good night. Have a great evening.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Stay warm.
Yeah, yeah, especially the next 2 days. Yeah.
Okay.